we've been spoon-fed with the knowledge that our leadership is just bad and it's all down to our fault. So we should blame ourselves as opposed to recognize that some of these issues are way before we even started existing as an independent state.
Yeah. First of all, just to avoid any trouble, the leadership is actually that bad. So let's get that out of the way.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Andrews. I'm the host for today. Welcome again to the Shaft podcast. On this episode, we'll be having like a section of the Shaft conversations where we have discussions around very important and interesting issues around the world. On today's episode, we'll be talking about something that probably happens all over the world. It's become the history of the world and generations of people we've come to know it. But also, it's a very bad thing that we need to reverse. And there's someone here who has been doing some work on it. Here with me on this episode is Abdul Karim Ibrahim. Karim, welcome.
Charlie Andrews, thank you.
Karim is a retired journalist. That's how he wants to call himself.
That's a very important one.
He's done a lot of media work in the past years, but currently he's focusing on decolonization. And so we'll talk about colonization and then enter into the conversations of decolonization, because I don't think it's a prominent topic as much as colonization is. Yeah. But before we get to that, I think I prompted this, but I wanted to ask you something about your writings. Oh. I just did a quick search, because Karim is a retired journalist. I did a quick search on some writings that he's done, and some of the headings I saw, like one was titled "Beneath the Veil of Ghana's Interfaith Harmony, Anti-Muslim Vibes and What Else Needs Fixing." Another one was titled 4 Years of Mahama, 2018 of Medical, Comparative Analysis of Relevance. Another one was titled Half-Baked Feminism and Fragile Masculinity, Talk of a Perfect Fit. And I look at the titles, and I just ask, who in this world sits and crafts the titles the way in which you craft it? Because in my mind, I'm trying to envision what's going on in your mind, and it seems like a lot of chaos underneath these titles. So the first question, your media writings, what inspired them, and how do you come about such striking titles that you come across with?
Well, until now, I didn't really know that there was anything striking about the titles. But, and again, these are opinions. So, the way that you introduce it, someone would think this is a peer-reviewed article on some top journal.
But these are media,
but these are just
articles,
opinion
media,
pieces.
Opinion pieces.
I mean, typically, I think that it goes without saying that titles often reflect what it is that people want to talk about. Yeah. And for me, at least in those instances when I wrote all of these, so I think the one about the interfaith situation in Ghana was at the peak of conversation not so long ago when I think there was a question of Wesley Girls High School and Muslims being able to pray. But, I mean, I am a Muslim. Half of my family is Christian. Half is Muslim. I went to Konongo Dumasi Senior High School. It had nothing to do with a missionary, whatever, even if we're going to grant the argument. It was a community school by every sense. But it was as Christianized as the Vatican City perhaps is. And so for me, these are all our experiences. But what I didn't like at the time when I was writing this was this attempt to gaslight people who were talking about the experiences to suggest that it doesn't matter. But if you speak to Muslims across various levels of education and they share their deep experiences along the lines of prejudice and all of those things, you would notice that it is not so true, this idea that we have around. For instance, during that period, the chief imam spoke about it, and you would notice that typically everybody is going to the chief imam, we all love him, pastors are going there. But when it is that he says that some of my grandchildren are in high schools in Ghana, some schools don't allow them to pray, as we learned from Wesley Girls at the time, that they didn't allow for Quran to come to the school, among other things like that. The way that they react is completely opposite to what they go to the chief imam's place to go and kneel down, father of the nation, and say all of those things. When it comes to actual decisions on problems, they are likely not interested to do that. So it's such a reflection of these kinds of things. And I'm sure I don't know if I want to encourage people to go and read, because every time I read what I have written in the past, I don't quite enjoy it. But I'm sure others can follow up and see.
I mean, I'm sure it's a very interesting piece, because I read the introductory part of it also, because I wanted to read the pieces, all of the pieces. Yeah. And I look across the pieces and it's like, the titles speak volumes, but when you go beneath the titles that are catchy, they're like very serious issues in the country that we need to be talking about, but it seems like they are not top of the list, right? Because this that you are speaking of, there's a significant portion of people who are Islam and who need to experience their faith in the most free way possible, right? But then if you start, and you've mentioned this, like every non-religious institution I've attended, the default is to resort to Christianity. So Wednesday, there's by force worship that everybody has to attend to. But there is nothing like, Muslims can go and do
like
their thing.
There's a sense of dishonesty, Andrews, with this, because often they would say that, these are school gatherings. I mean,
it's not.
It's
to
not.
the point where sometimes they invite pastors, they invite like religious clerics to come and preach and do all those things.
In my school, and again, you see, this is a community school in Konongo. We used to have, at least at the time when I was in school, we used to have a period where we do what we call retreats. And it was basically 3 nights, all-night service.
Wow.
So they import pastors from wherever, and they come, they go through the entire length of it, find people falling all over the place, casting and exercising witchcraft from students. You see, even the stigma that is created among us of those who are witches and those who are not. But the point is that somehow people say we should disregard all of that. You see, in this country today, at least many Muslims have had that experience. If you sit in a trotro and someone gets up and they are preaching, I mean, it is fine to preach, but there are some elements in proselytization that universalizes one's beliefs, often tells other people that they are wrong. So, for instance, I mean, I wouldn't have a problem if you are telling me that, Christ, if you don't accept Christ as a Lord and personal Savior, you go to hell and all of this. I mean, I don't have a problem. But you see, I suspect that one day, maybe from Makola to wherever, if I stood up and started speaking or preaching as a Muslim,
people have a problem with it.
I don't know, but I suspect there will be some problem with it. You see, so for me, I feel like we just don't have to run away from these things when the conversation comes up.
I get you.
You get it. I mean, we enjoy Salam meet together. There are lots of things that we do together. But if people raise issues, I mean, in my school, high school again, Mr. Cyprian was a chaplain who would walk through and lash people. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim, you can't sing.
To say, like in high school, there's church service. That one is not even some Wednesday half-baked 30 minutes worship. It's proper church service on a Sunday evening or a Sunday morning. Everyone is expected to go, and if you dare miss it, they would come through dormitories, punish you severely for missing these things.
I love church service though. I loved the and I still do the praise and worship. That one I love. But you see, it's still important that we don't, for those who say, I don't want to participate. Me, I've been to the Catholic Church before, I've been to the Pentecost Church before, I've been to Mozambique Disco Cristo Church before. This is all because I have family members who belong to all of these. So, but do not tell other people. It does exist. We have a problem that we need to resolve.
I think there's this thing that I've come to realize recently, that people who experience privilege feel gaslighted anytime people speak about that privilege. And part of the reason is that because they are so used to it since they were born, they don't even recognize that that's privilege. Right? And if we are not open to confronting it, then that normalization would always exist, to the point where for people who need to fight for it, you are sort of delegitimizing their experiences by saying, this is not a thing, this doesn't exist.
Precisely. I think you've captured it accurately. That's the experiences that you get from me. I mean, take for instance, maybe like just one final bit on this. If you consider student elections, right? And for me, at all times when I have been extremely animated about this, it's because of these kinds of things. So when I ran for a school prefect, again, in Konongo, I mean, I had things, right? I mean, someone, for instance, came to ask during the manifesto reading process, why I should not be disqualified because I don't come for this all-night service thing. Right? I mean, I saw it in Legon when Migdad Mohammed was running for SRC president. We heard all manner of things. So there's a problem there. We should not overlook it. We should not deny it.
And I mean, to be fair, even in this whole national election lead up to NPP's flag bearer selection, there was a severe conversation. There were some comments passed. Do we want the leading flag bearer of a major political party to be a Muslim? Do we want an Islamic president? Like, to be very honest, and not to mince words, those conversations are very stupid conversations.
Extremely.
Like, extremely stupid conversations.
And for me, it is also very interesting how, because I think, Dr. Bawumia, he's been completely horrible as the vice president of this republic. If it matters that election outcomes demonstrate some competence, accountability, and all of that, he shouldn't win this election. But when it comes to how he's playing around churches and dancing off beats in Methodist church and all of those things, I don't discount it. The way that I engage with that is I see it as a problem that we have created for ourselves.
That he has to.
If people like him don't do that, you won't engage them. So if Bawumia is, as they call him, they say he's what, church prostitute or something. If he indeed is a church prostitute, it's as a result, we have requires him to we like for people to suck our whatever. And I think that is precisely what is happening. He is very happy to bend the knee and suck whatever it is that we want him to suck because he wants to win. But the reality is that we have created that problem. We cannot overlook it.
The funny part is he can't have that conversation.
Oh yeah, of course he can't.
He can't. He's in a position where
everybody has to run away from it.
For him to
so those of us who can talk about it is also because at least at this point in our lives, there's nothing that we need that's attached to it. It gets us to come and lie about it, so we can go ahead and say it. But that's what it is.
I mean, it's an interesting opening to the conversation because I really love this part where there are lots of things that are happening. People sort of shy away from it and barely talk about it. And very similarly, colonization is one of these hot topics. It's a hot topic that people, recently, I don't know if you follow football news that much. The Argentinian national team singing a song, the French national team taking offense because you are literally saying that they are not worthy of their identities and all that. And that's obviously back to the whole point of colonization, inferior identities, people exerting racial superiority over others. And what I want to know here is, do we have a misconception of how damaging colonization has been to a lot of countries? Or have we reached a point where we start to downplay how damaging colonization has been to a lot of countries? Because you look at Ghana, we are over 60 years since we gained independence. People sit and look back and say, it's been 60 years. You should not be referencing your colonial history. But is it that the damages that have been caused, 60 years is too little time, and that we've stopped perceiving it as damages. Therefore, also our approach to solving them is eliminating the colonial factors under these problems.
So yes, first of all, I still do my football a lot. As I've told you, I'm a retired journalist. I mean, I started as a sports whatever before, but so. Again, I think the classic example of the recent conversation on the Argentina situation should perhaps answer the question that you have posed. Because I don't think that a good number of us get the essence of course, that's the case of racism, but it's an adjacent problem. I think that many of us don't seem to appreciate where we are on this thing of colonization or decolonization or post-colonial institution systems and all of that. So often I think we are a lot engaged with the physical manifestations of it, right? And I also, again, I don't say any of these things as an expert. I'm a student. I'm interested in this subject, and I've had the opportunity to work with some people and do some work in that space. The sense that I get generally, and also relating that to our everyday experiences, conversations that we are in, take our institutions as a state, among other things like that, you would notice that we don't truly have a sense of what this is about. And so for many, by the evidence of some truncation of the political colonization as a project.
Yeah.
It is assumed that we are out of the woods. We're not. And that is also why, even though one does not necessarily excuse our own difficulties and failures if we say that it is not enough to say it is 60 years and so whatever, right? But the point is to say that we must not discount and misunderstand the amount of work that we have to do. So very simple examples. If you take, say, our legal system or justice system, among many other things, there are elements in there in terms of even the aesthetics, right? So how judges dress, someone might say that it doesn't matter, but it does matter because if you see the premium they place in the idea that we got our common law from the, sometimes they say colonial masters or whatever. There was a time that the Ghana Police Service was reacting to something, I think it was from the Fix the Country or somebody like that. And they basically were citing the English as to legitimize what they are doing, to say that,
when the protest happens here and they respond this way.
Good. Yes, what about protest? That, even our colonial masters. So, I think the response rather was to either the British High Commission or I'm sure we can factor this later, but it was to one of the diplomatic missions because they had raised objection to
I think it was the LGBTQ thing.
Okay.
When a foreign ambassador or a high commissioner was commenting on it, and then there was a back and forth with.
There was a particular paragraph where it was referenced that even our colonial masters, where we got our police force and the system. So for me, if you look at all of that, you must situate that within a certain context. When those institutions were established, what did not exist was the idea and the entity called Ghana as a political entity. And as you know how many states in the African continent came about, many of the modern states came about. It was basically a bunch of
lottery.
Men
sit around the table,
somewhere,
draw some lines.
Precisely.
Which territories do I want? Let's decide, and then
that's what it came down. It came down to. And so if you look at the national or the country state makeups and all, you can see all the problems in there. But the point is that our association with all of these institutions, and then again, even the sort of affinity that we have, and many other things. So when Professor of African Studies was Professor Michael Pesa-White was at the Supreme Court during the election, one of the election petition cases, and to the extent that a member of the Supreme Court, I think it was the Chief Justice at the time or so, make a joke that the professor was not so properly dressed before the courts and he probably should have worn a suit or something like. All of those jokes, they mean something. They're not just jokes. It goes to really explain how we think, where we are on many things. And so for me, there's a great deal of problem. As we go through this conversation, we will be touching about on some of those things. I think we need to be very serious about the problem of decolonization and not make it look as though, well, because some people packed their bags and left, all is gone. No.
How much of this is down to how those who packed their bags and left has also framed the current leadership that we have? Because we've seen several rhetorics of African leaders are irresponsible. Every single thing, Western media blows it up. There is chaos here. It's like negative news from former colonies get much more amplification than positive news from former colonies. To the point where if something negative should happen now, the entire world would hear. But if something good, like an African should implement a great policy, you hear very little of it from the international perspective. Is it also that framing is entrenching in the local minds that it's our leadership problem because they left the reins for us? See, how bad is it to the point where people can say we prefer colonial era to a world where we are independent as a state? Is it also that, like, we've been spoon-fed with the knowledge that our leadership is just bad and it's all down to our fault, so we should blame ourselves as opposed to recognize that some of these issues are way before we even started existing as an independent state?
Yeah. first of all, just to avoid any trouble,
Yeah.
the leadership is actually that bad. So let's get that out of the way.
Yeah.
I mean, if you cast your eyes around, you will see.
You would see that
there's one around the Christ the King area. If you look across Christ the King, you will see one there. There's one from Bole who wants to come back. If you go to Kenya, you will see one.
Yeah.
They are sucking him right now. So they are all over the place. So that's fine. But so are bad leaders almost everywhere.
Yeah.
If you go to the United States, for instance, there's one who literally is cognitively declining, but still wants to be president.
The alternative is also one who is like literally crazy.
Yeah, he's a bad boy who like had a bullet graze his ear, and now you see. So they are there.
Yeah.
All of them are there. But if you look at the nature of say a developmental problem, because the truth is that for a lot of people, at the end of the day, it comes down to the realities of their life. So in many parts of our world, people are really going through it, right? So recently, for the organization that I work for, we did this webinar of some sort, right? We're basically discussing the problem of mass immigration or immigration of Africa's youth workforce. Yeah. And the numbers are staggering. Even if you take just Ghana, right? Yeah. So, and this cuts across. What you would notice is that people just want better lives, right? And that's fair. But the way our states have been structured, and the way that we have also been integrated into the larger global architecture, it leaves one with an extremely slim chance of finding their own solutions to their own problems, right? So it's political, it's economic, it's social, it's cultural, it's religious, it's everything, really. So, but the question sometimes is, okay, why don't you just wake up and get yourself out of that bubble? It really doesn't work like that. So it requires a certain understanding, a common engagement of all of these problems, because first, we must really recognize that there's a problem there before anything at all. And that's what I think our education, for instance, often denies us of, right? So all over, you see a great deal of uncritical folks as a result of our own training, among many other things.
To be very honest, I was watching an interview this morning. I won't mention the station, and I think it's an interview they did about a year ago, and they were interviewing like a financial expert on mortgages, and I was like, look, just term it an advert and do it. Because the person who is moderating that interview is literally just being spoon-fed and saying, oh, that's great. Oh, people didn't know this. But there are clear questions there that you need to ask to be critical of it. So, for instance, clearly with the issue of mortgages, it is sold as a very nice thing, but the interest parts are not spoken of. And that's the part that punishes people the most. You're having an interview, somebody's doing education on mortgages, and not once is there a question on interest rates, is there a question of payment conditions, the thing that people suffer about the most. Like that uncritical aspect of our mind, even to the highest levels of media, where we think that, oh, these people should be critical thinkers, they should be asking questions on our behalf and should be probing, literally saying, oh, they are the fourth arm of the state and all that. To see it like embodied at that level just tells you how bad it is.
No, I mean, again, not to say that someone is better or more critical than anybody, but the reality is that it is that bad. I mean, we've all studied at some point something that alludes to the benefits of colonialism, for instance.
That's true.
Yeah, that's complete bonkers.
That's true.
Right?
We've actually had to study advantages of colonialism.
Yeah. So these are clearly objectively very silly things. Like there's no running around it. Yeah. But you see, it's also a harder conversation to have because for many, it comes down to comparing, okay, at the end of the day, you live in Ghana, you are working in a very terrible situation, maybe you are not making any good money, you are really just struggling in life. People go out there, go do whatever it is, and they seem to be doing well. So when you do that comparative, often you just want to jump into it. But the way that, for me, I think that we resolve these kinds of systemic problems that we have is to first and foremost have a certain recognition and acknowledgement that the problem exists. Yeah. And by that, it requires us to ask questions beyond this impression that for us, we are pathologically lazy, we are unintelligent, it is corruption.
The system is just bad.
That's not really the case. I mean, if you take, for instance, the remittances that the Ghanaians in the diaspora brought home in the past, say, financial year, and consistently, it's always better than what all of these corporations from out there will come here, take whatever it is, and give in return. So there's clearly a problem with the structure that we all live in. But the challenge has always been that it looks like these are like just abstractions. So if you sit in Accra and you say there's a problem with how everything is structured, and as a result, development has become a challenge and all of those things, the question that comes next is, what do we do?
What do we do?
Right. And for me, it's fair because everybody sometimes thinks about these things within their own lifetime. So they want the change to happen immediately so that they can see it or benefit from it, which is okay. But sometimes it's not like that, because if you take the histories of all the so-called developed economies or countries that we know today, there's none of them that one would comfortably say they were, say, where Ghana is as a state in 60 years, right? There's none of them that, for instance, developed their economies, and this you can look at the works of somebody like Hajun Chan, in particular, kicking away the ladder, the Good Samaritan, and other works like that, very critical works like that. You would notice that it has never been the history of any of these countries that this is how they develop. So today, after all that we have been through with the coming into force of the Washington Consensus and this neoliberal agenda that took, roots maybe from 70s, but more in our case in the 80s and all of that, you can see how today, as a result of all of those things, we have created this bunch of very useless political class who are there merely as stewards of this new cotton farm that they are all working on for whoever is at the World Bank or Washington.
It's interesting that you bring this up, because the final part of colonization, which a lot of people would term as new colonization, like the baby boy face of colonization that's ruling all of us, which you term as the cotton farm. It's modern aid and loan dependency, literally. Is the way in which our financial systems are structured to have to depend on or gain legitimacy from an external financial system that we have zero control over. It's a way in which we run a state in which, for external financiers to gain confidence in our system, they need to see us under the control of puppeteers such as the IMF and the World Bank, such that they see us under those structured programs, and all of a sudden, investor confidence goes up. And so, because IMF is in town, so these guys, there's a sensible father who is coming to make sure that the nutheads do the right thing. I think it's become a case where now, which is reflected in the Kenyan crisis, become a case where now citizens are voting for leaders who are not the ones making the decisions for them. Citizens are voting for leaders who literally just go to IMF, World Bank, who dictate requirements of economic policies that have to be passed. Ruto's issue was one of the most sad for me, not because I sympathize with him as a person, but I'm trying to imagine if you're a leader in that situation where your country is going literally bankrupt, you don't have money, you cannot pay government workers, and they need money to survive. And IMF is the one to give you that money, and they're requiring you to raise all these taxes. What do you do? It's like between a rock and a hard place, an impossible situation to be in. Look at what happened to Ghana going to the IMF, the haircut on pensioners. For the first time, pensioners had to go to including the former Chief Justice, had to get out, go to the Finance Minister's office to go and protest because of situations that these colonial hegemons put us under. I think people don't recognize how much of a puppeteering system we are in.
Again, and I'm very happy the way that you have set this up, because when you talk about this, and I have had this conversation with a cousin of mine who works in the development economics space. We had a long debate, and I'm sure he will watch it. So shout outs to him. But there's a sense in which we think that. So, for instance, when it comes to the IMF bid, usually it comes down to two things. It suggests that as a country you are supposed to operate like a company,
like a capitalist structure.
Good. So there are some activities that you do to make some money, as a government, say taxes and all of that. And then there's also then there's also what you do by way of spending.
Yeah.
The reality is that we spend more and make less for very obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And as a result, we become so indebted that at some point something has to be done about it. So typically, what we are made to believe the IMF intervention comes down to is a certain senior housemaster who comes and tries to get an equilibrium.
Straighten the things.
Yeah. Except that this senior housemaster is coming directly upon the appointment of the headmaster.
Yeah.
Who benefits the most?
From you being in debt.
Exactly. So it's just it's such a con act, right? But somehow we have come to accept it. And again, I think this is where often the problem in terms of the understanding of people or even agreeing to our side of the argument is about. There's obviously the challenge of sometimes very superfluous spending,
senseless corruption,
terrible behavior actually. So all of that is there. And so for these people who don't, for instance, consider the IMF to be the problem, they say that why not just do what is right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if it is free senior high school policy, even your own finance minister said that you could, we should perhaps make people who can pay
for themselves.
Why are you not doing it? And all of those things, or the corruption, too many V8s, this and that, all the expenditure. So sometimes, they have a point to say that you could as well on your own. If you are going to do what the IMF will come and tell you to do, why not just do it?
Yeah.
Right? Say Ruto.
Yeah.
If it is possible to sack your cabinet and not die, why did you not do it? Why did it never occur to you that this is something that you could do? So it's fair to raise all of those things. But again, those kinds of objections miss the bigger point.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you must also ask yourself why the dollar is all there is.
Yeah, we tell ourselves, we have some influence on our currency and its value. To be very honest, we don't.
You don't.
A lot of these leaders are clueless as to, ask an economist, they will give you 17 different explanations of things that affect your currency value. They can't pinpoint which at what point time kicks in to start an effect. And if they can't tell you, there is no way of realistically telling me that there's an economic guru somewhere who can actually control the way in which your currency responds to them.
Because typically what they do, and that's what the Baumias of this world are about, it's about, okay, this problem exists for us. There's nothing significant or fundamental that we are going to change about it. Yeah. Ours is that which we have gone to school, we've learned their models and how they say this works. So when we come back home, we will see how we can make something small from the system. That's just foolish thinking, right? Not to Baumia, but to just about everybody who doesn't think that there's a problem here. So you cannot assume that this works. And again, there are just so many things. So for instance, even in terms of political institutions or countries and the path that they have taken. If you take classic case of, say, Cuba, right, which has decided, among many other things, to stay a certain political course. Yeah. All of those things, so sometimes when people ask, why can't you just do whatever it is that you can do? I cite the Cuba example to suggest that this is also not a fair game, and there are punishments for
those for breaking away from the system.
Who say we have had enough.
Yeah.
Right? There are punishments for those people.
They'll penalize you.
Yes. Because, for instance, a country says, I intend to take a different political, economic path. Yeah, you might as well leave them to be their communists, right? But your own is that you blockade them. You show the whole world that
being that is bad.
But that is not on the account of the poverty of the idea.
Yeah, it's on account of your
preference or your punitive action against them for doing something that you do not like. Yeah. So quite clearly, in many ways, if we do not align ourselves also with the international system the way that it is, we will suffer.
Yeah.
The question then comes down to what to do about this. Do you go about doing it in isolation, or do you work together somehow to achieve that? And that's where, ideas of Pan-Africanism would come in. And again, if you just look at Pan-Africanism and the way that it's conceptualized and viewed, you can see how all of these questions. I mean, it may have its own shortcomings among many other things like that, but you would see how all of these are catered for one way or the other in that establishment. But unfortunately today, there's not much from that end. Of course, there's some work ongoing, and I've seen, I mean, there are people writing, there are people doing all manner of things, but we're not seeing the way that we want. And unfortunately also, we have all gotten to a point where, so for today, for instance, this recent conversation about what the running mate of the New Patriotic Party said about Kwame Nkrumah. And I think Samson Ladi Ayenene, the journalist and lawyer, said something that really also echoes my personal sentiments about this. Because look at how, today we're talking about all of these problems, but look at how we compare our leaders. How many kilometers of road? Who build how many factories? It doesn't matter if the factory doesn't produce shit.
No,
right?
We just use numbers.
Oh yeah, so it is just
how
very
many
plural.
hospitals?
And it's not as though someone went to see their grandmother and took some loan to come and build the hospital.
You took our money.
It's our money.
Yeah, exactly.
Or that you borrowed and knew that you were dead when it's time to pay.
Yeah.
So, but again, there's one man who also he's far more than his industries, right? He's also about bringing Africa together. He's also about addressing these fundamental problems. Those things must also matter. The fact that ideas don't seem to matter much to us, that is also precisely why we are where we are. It is not for nothing that if you go to the Southern Africa, the Eastern Africa, I mean, this is anecdotal, but I find them more critical than us.
I think the truth is that our politics has zero philosophy underpinning it.
Yeah.
Our politics has zero philosophy. It's all about, like you said, like numbers, how many roads, how many hospitals, who is more corrupt, who had more scandals under them and all that. Because you don't see any fundamental inspiration behind the political conversations that we are having and what the logic, what the philosophy that guards the country should be. There is zero philosophical conversation about any of those things.
And just to say that this is in no way a contradiction to the bigger point that we are making here. Because then I guess someone who disagrees with us would say that, okay, if there's zero philosophy, fundamental values and all of that, whose responsibility, for instance, is it to? Yes. But the way, for me, that's why the way that you approach this problem is not to select one of the two bad guys or three bad guys or whatever. But it's to also appreciate that even for the very people that unfortunately for us, we are counting on to do the thinking.
They are clueless about
what they are themselves victims of this problem. Of course, maybe in their case, their victimhood also presents them some benefits. Right? So maybe the corruption allows them to have extra money, they're able to take care of their family, they're able to create good life for themselves and all of that. So yes, we are obviously angry with that. But it doesn't in any way, I mean, rebut the presumption that they are clearly silly, unintelligent, uncritical, and that we cannot, obviously, as it is now, expect anything great from them also. It then sort of puts us into this bubble where it looks like there's nothing we can do. There is something we can do.
I think that's what I'm coming to about, like, decolonization. What I first want to know is, what is it really? And is it even possible? Because, like, the discussion we've just had up until this point seemed like, look, the system is just rigged against us. The people who are in place to try and fight the system are themselves dabbling with powers they cannot understand or comprehend, and we are in a helpless situation. But you seem to be doing some work on decolonization. I want to know what it is and whether at all it is possible that people should fight for such an end goal.
I'm very careful at the way you are exaggerating my credentials. I am not at all doing work in decolonization. At least not in the sense of how you are saying it, because that's for.
But even what you are doing here now is work on decolonization.
That's for Globo Sabelo. That's for Achille Mbembe, Professor Kambon, Akusi Adumakampo. Those people, they are the ones doing. They are the ones doing. We are just observing. But the way that I understand decolonization is, I think the closest maybe definition or attempt to explain it that I would use is what the late Professor Kwesi Redu, one of like Africa's foremost philosophers, has said about this. it basically comes down to divesting, and in this sense, I would say Africa broadly, or say Ghana, of undue foreign influence. And here, the foreign obviously directly aims at the colonial establishment or the global north, or all of those states today who necessarily did not contribute directly to your occupation or colonialism or colonization, but somehow are embedded in the structure that continues to perpetuate colonialism the way that it is today, right? So it is the divestment or divesting oneself of these undue influences, right? I mean, football is lovely. You see, it came from England. We have applied football in a certain way in this country before. I mean, during independence struggles in Ghana, in Uganda, in Nigeria, and these are all evident in my own work that I've been doing, and I've seen traces of all of this. People have reported on it that it cuts across. We use football, for instance, to now begin to organize for anti-colonial struggles, right? So that means that we can learn something from other people. That's fine. So it's about undue influences, which sometimes include, for instance, the way that we conceptualize our own self, right? So if you take what we wear, right, or even the language that we speak, there's a sense in which if you go to our schools, so for me, what I am doing now, it's more on decolonization within the academic space, within the education space, right? So that's how it's about. If you look at our schools, I don't know if maybe I should think there are some places that would be. Our experiences with, I grew up in Konongo, so it was Chi. Our experiences with speaking our mother tongue.
In school, you are punished.
Yes. First of all, it is regarded as vernacular, which is pejorative in the first place, right? And then secondly, there's something with, if you are too good at Chi or Ghanaian language,
there's an undue correlation between your level of fluency to how less intelligent you are.
Good.
So if you are very fluent in Cree, then you are a less intelligent person.
So back in primary school, one of my friends...
the reverse actually is true. They use the reverse. If you are very fluent in English, then you're a very intelligent person.
Again, complete nonsense, right? So if you look at that, and for instance, if you just stay on the subject of language, and what it means for development of intellect, cognitive development, behavioral development broadly, even in terms of the politics of things, you would see that there's a great deal of work that we need to do in that space. There are people like, who readily come to mind, like Professor Adam Bodomo, who are doing a lot of work, Professor Asiatuk, Obadele Kambon, doing some work in this area of linguistics and decolonization. So there are just about everything in our lives that is somehow entangled in this one way or the other. Even if you take religion, right? At this point, all of us are somehow so stuck in a Christian, Muslim, whatever traditions that it's perhaps impossible that we would come out of it. Or maybe we don't even have to come out of it. But we cannot also not recognize the obviously colonial tendencies of all of these religions. Because these religions don't, for instance, disregard the fact that other people say they have gods. Right? They know about your gods, but they don't like your God. But the way that it works is that there are other gods from wherever who have this tendency to believe that for them, they are the best since sliced bread, right? So they have to go all around the world and proselytize. Maybe that in itself is not bad, but it is the spirit underlying that
condescending nature with which they interact.
The idea that it is me, it's not Tigare or it is not the God. And sometimes these things look very funny when you talk about it because, I mean, based on your own experience, maybe you have at your adult stage chosen to stay in Christianity or Islam because you objectively believe that it makes more sense. But it doesn't take anything away from the fact that that God is not any different in scope from all those guys that brought the ships, right? And I don't mean missionaries. I mean it in the sense of those who believe in colonialism, those who believe, for instance, today that their ideas are far superior, those who are racist. I think it is the same principle.
Actually is.
Yes.
Actually is. And like, if you look how bad the language, because I was just thinking about the language thing and I realized, like, to the point where in this day and age, anyone who is not fluent in the colonial language is literally locked out of the educational system.
Yeah.
You cannot meaningfully participate if you are fluent in the local dialect and cannot speak English, because all the other subjects are taught in English except local language, which is one subject which is not regarded.
Yeah.
It is not, like, we stop learning it after some point. It's one of the most insignificant things we are like, let's do it because now it's a requirement for us to do it. And so I think what you are saying is much more pernicious than people probably perceive it, right? And it's determining lives of people in very significant ways that we are choosing to ignore.
So, for instance, like, even the way that we think about things, right?
Yeah.
So for instance, if a country called Ghana is a product of colonial creation, which colonial creation has not entirely ended, right?
Yeah.
So we are in a Commonwealth, we're basically outposts for former colonial powers, right? So, and the Americas and the rest. Given that reality, if you ask yourself, so for instance, if you take, say, another problem or institution like governance, right? That subject leader-controller relationship hasn't exactly changed in the way that things are. So we're still pretty much subjects of Akufo-Addo in the same way that perhaps his father was to Gordon Gadgesberg.
Yeah.
In terms of the architecture and the names of the people leading the things, some of those things have changed. But in terms of the treatment, the disdain that we see and all of that, I don't think that it has changed. And that's why also sometimes, even when we are protesting against our own government, we are limited in our imagination of what that can look like.
Yeah.
Right? So, and all of those things are influenced by power, by language, by the way that we live our lives, among many other things. So you cannot... People, for instance, don't understand how, if someone is a leader, they don't necessarily have to have life significantly better than other people. Yeah. I, for instance, have a problem that if you are, say, a pastor, like a career pastor, if you have decided to do what Christ did as a Christian, I do not think that there's any moral justification for being wealthier than the average person in your congregation. Right? Yeah. In a sense of, having all of these flashy things, big medals.
They said it's God's blessing.
You get it? So there's a lot of problems in all of these.
Pick and amplify
that
people choose, like the leader of the church is supposed to be fed by the church. Those things, like there's pickpocketing and amplification of specific text that suits.
Even a relationship with God. Yeah. In the sense of like Christian, Muslim, or Islamic God. There's a problem there in how that relationship, for instance, can also affect how people conduct their moral life, right? So, and these are anecdotes and the way that I understand these things. If you consider the place of, say, shrines, eggs, and curses, right, in dealing with issues of truth, of accountability, among other things, do you not think it would be a very interesting scenario if in the next parliament or after the next election when we're doing the inauguration at the wherever, we have egg on standby, we have some appetition or some snap on standby, right, and to force, say, whoever wins and say their ministers and all of that to just simply, they would tell you, for instance, that they don't believe in it. Most of them are Christians and Muslims,
but still do it.
Yes. They would say, for instance, that this violates their religious rights and all of that. But if, as a people, we want to be sincere, let's challenge ourselves with this and see, especially for those who don't believe in it, then the gods can't do anything to you. Everybody drop one egg, right, and commit that this is what I say I want to do. So for me, I think it is important because if that draws a sense of fear in a way that is likely going to make you more honest than you are with the alternative of Christ, who is just a darling boy who embraces all sinners, right? So you always have time, right, to do something else. all of those things. I mean, they are funny.
Yeah.
But I think if we were serious about it, we would see the connection between that. And so, for instance, if today, anecdotally again, if we think that honesty, public morality, and all transparency have all declined, perhaps it's as a result of all of these things. Because today, we really are practicing two systems, right? As Peter K has talked about, we have one morality for the civil order.
Yeah, one morality for the political.
Yes, elite. You have read that word, right? Yeah. Where those who live South Dai, Bumprugu, Daboya, Menchia, to come to Accra, they seem to come not for everybody, but for, and this is very different from representing your constituency. Yeah. So when you have ministers, you nominate ministers, you see the people who oftentimes will sit behind them in parliament, is their chief, they are everything. Yeah. And they like this idea of this is one of our own. Yeah. And if you read this work, Colonialism and the Two Publics, I've always introduced it to anybody who is interested to read about it. Yeah. If you do, you would see evidence in Nigeria and other places of how this kind of double system, as a result of what the colonial system left for us, being the governance structure and all of that, and then our own homes, where we come from, our ethnic groups, the morals there. If you steal from Accra, and you use that to give scholarship opportunities to 10 people from your village, it doesn't matter that you cheated someone else. Yeah. The chiefs tend to applaud you.
They appreciate it. Yeah.
But if you perhaps stole from that same village, it is likely that the gods will strike you down. Yeah. So there's all of that confusion, and those who have succeeded in putting them together neatly seem to be doing very well. Yeah. And that's the problem that I think we are in.
I mean, final thoughts on this as well. Like, Ghana is such a chaotic place to try and look at how the evolution of colonial effect is going. And it's sad to also see that there is a decline in the conversations around colonialism, its effects, and how it's really leaving us in shackles. Yeah. Like, I don't mind, like, lambast Akufo-Addo, lambast Bawumia, all the governments, like, I don't think they are sensible, like, in a lot of the policies that they make. Yeah. They are detached from the people. Like, just recently, we saw this whole proposition to remove speed, a very stupid proposition, by the way, to remove speed limits from parliamentarians' vehicles and attach perpetual sirens and all that. Like, I don't care, right? But we can't also deny that these guys are touting themselves as messiahs of a problem they can't even recognize. Yes. The magnitude to which those problems exist. So, like, final thoughts on how this could work if a state decides to go down the path of decolonization.
I think there obviously are going to be challenges because the current establishment serves some people's interests, right? Yeah. So there's obviously going to be a pushback. But imagine examples like say China, right? I mean, you don't have to accept everything that they do, but in terms of how they have reoriented themselves and positioned themselves and see themselves, you can tell clearly that it is manifest in so many things. So even the idea of having to, at least if not for anything at all, produce whatever it is that they need, it's so fundamental that there's no debate about, right? So my point is, if you take, for instance, again, the kinds of, these are not grand changes that we are seeing in Kenya, but the reaction suggests also that it is possible if Kenya as a country
wants to do it.
Or regarded its people very differently. And again, just final bit here. Even though I agree, and I've made a point to suggest that the global architecture is problematic and oftentimes it's very difficult to get out of it and all of that. My view also is that, as we have seen in many other instances across the world, with, for instance, the Arab Spring and the way that it didn't achieve the intended purposes, I suppose. But we have seen some changes there. We have seen, for instance, how wars in Europe have changed things. We have seen how COVID-19 has changed things. It is possible that if we had, at this point, a sweeping call for change in a way that is extremely disruptive. Because if it is not disruptive, I am not sure, right? And I appreciate also that we have such bastards leading us in many instances that they are willing to kill, right? So So people have died. People died in Kenya.
Yeah.
Ghana's last election, 8 people died. Nothing has happened
yeah.
in all of those instances. NSAS in Nigeria,
Lots
people
of
died, right? And nothing significant has happened. So we really sort of have to make a decision, and not in the sense that we can sit around the table and do this. But my point is that we need to be disruptive in our own circles. So for me, like I think I probably have done on this in this conversation, or when I have an opportunity in the media engagement and all of that. If you see me, if you see me outside, I was trained very well. I behave. I don't insult people, but if I'm on Ghana Connect on Joy, and I know that people are listening. If my problem is with Duncan Williams, I will say it and I will mention his name. You see, just so we would appreciate it, because all of us have a role to play. And for me, it hurts that despite all that we can do, and even recognizing all the problems that we have, there seems to be a situation that today we are just sucked up in it, and everybody seems to have decided that they will find their own way around it, and then they'll be fine. It doesn't work like that. That is why we have worked and worked and worked, but we're still where we are. That is why today, after COVID and all the mismanagement that we have seen in the last 8 years, for instance, everybody decides that let's pack our bags and leave. You have left. Many other people have left. You see, and it's worrying. I mean, we can always exchange, but the narrative out there right now among many of us in our generation is that there's practically nothing that we can do, right? And people are marrying late. People are doing so many things that they love late. Our parents were marrying at 21 and all of that. But these days, Charlie, 37, you can't even pay 2-bedroom apartment in Accra. So we need to do more, and we need to be disruptive. Don't forget about small insults. If it is insults that will trigger someone to appreciate that you are angry, as we have at least recently demonstrated with what do you call it, the speed ramps and these are minor things, but I think we need to do that. We need to do that.
I mean, it's a fascinating conversation. There are two things you said that have really fascinated me. The first one is if you look at decolonization, it's not just an attempt to decouple from or detach from colonial masters, but also like people who and countries who are along the line have come to form part of the existing structure that exert colonial influences. And I think that bit of it is one that people miss almost all the time, because it's always colonial masters versus colonies, rather than, okay, what about all those who joined along the line, right? And the second thing you mentioned, which is China's like path to sort of creating a self-dependent state where they produce a lot of things on their own. And you look at that, and that gives them the authority and the effrontery to also say, we are decoupling from the US dollar. Because they don't import from you. Therefore, your currency valuation relative to theirs has zero implication. In China, dollar value, no dollar value, nobody cares. But today, dollar value should rise by an inch in this country, and prices go helter-skelter because everything we do is based on importing certain things from the West and all that. So, like, it's been a really, really fun conversation having this talk with you. But Karim, you brought a book. Like, you were holding this big book with you when you came around.
That's it.
What book is it? Because I think you mentioned that you wanted to talk about it.
So it's a student, a handbook on student politics and representation. So it's I worked briefly sometime I think in 2021 at All Africa Students Union. It's the Looks of Africa, the largest student body in the world, and this was a partnership that we had with Professor Manya Clemenchich from Harvard University. She's a professor of education, and so like this is a project to basically create the first student governance handbook in the world. So it combines chapters from All African Students Union, the European Students Union, the Pan-Arab Students Union, and many others like that. There are also contributions from very many writers on national, regional, global student governance issues and all of that. And so it's a really interesting thing, especially for those who are also doing some work in academia and education and all of that. this perhaps will be a very interesting thing for them.
I think student education is actually one thing that's like barely treated with some form of critical mind or eye. So like it's really interesting to see, because when I saw it, all this I hadn't really read the title. So all this while I thought it was like some philosophy book, some big book.
No.
But it seems like very, very relative to us now. So it's really interesting.
It is because so there's a chapter on nooks in Ghana that two, I think, or more, Ghanaian, student leaders wrote. You will find chapters, from Nigeria, from Cameroon, from Kenya, Uganda, and many other places. Of course, in Europe, Latin America, and other places. So it's
is it on sale now? Like, can anyone get some to buy?
Yes, I don't even know if it's on sale, but I know that now it's out there somehow. Yeah. Okay. I tend to lean more towards the
pirating.
No, not pirating. There's a sense of communal access to knowledge. My view is that knowledge is a
shared resource.
It's a shared enterprise. So we need to be able to learn. Capitalism can't win all the time like that. So, but
I'll definitely find it.
Of course, people invested in it. So yes, if it's out there and there's a price tag to it, you can also see that it's a contribution to.
All right, thanks, Karim. Like, it's a really nice. It's nice to hear that. Like, now we are taking the foundations of our actual political systems much more seriously. So, thanks for joining us. Leave your likes, your comments, subscribe to the podcast. This has been the Shaft Conversation with Abdul Karim Ibrahim, and it's been really nice. A retired journalist, sports fan.
I should say something about the Shaft. I think that you guys are doing an amazing job, and it goes without saying. Almost everybody who has come on has said it. For me, it has been extremely interesting because I'm retired as a journalist. I just sit home all the time, so I'm always looking forward to like the next episode that you guys will share. And so thank you so much for really doing this.
Thanks Karim, for coming on as well. Thanks everyone. It's been a nice 1 hour conversation. See you on the next episode. Bye guys.